Parashat Korach. So Parsha begins with the following passages. You have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? So said Korach to Moses, and Korach had a point. At the heart of his challenge is equality. That is surely a Jewish idea. Was not Thomas Jefferson most biblical when he wrote the Declaration of Independence? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Of course, Korach does not mean what he says. He claims to be opposed of any institution of leadership, and at the same time wants to be its leader. All are equal, but some are more equal than others. That is the seventh command in George Orwell's Animal Farm, his critique of Stalinist Russia. But what if Korach meant it? If he had been sincere? There is, at the face of it, a compelling logic to what he says. Did God not call on Israel to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation? Meaning, a kingdom of which each member is a priest, a nation all whose citizens are holy. Why then should there be priest and one high priest? Did not the military hero Gideon say, in the era of the judges, I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. Why then shall there be a single, life-appointed, Moses-style leader, rather than what happened in the day of the judges, namely charismatic leaders who led the people through a particular crisis and then went back to their previous anonymity? And to Gideon's point, surely the people needed no other leader than God. The prophet Samuel warns the people of the dangers of appointing a king. He will take your sons and make them serve his chariots and horses. When that day comes, you will cry for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day. This is the biblical anticipation of Lord Acton's famous remark, all power tends to corrupt. Why then give power to individuals, Moses and Aaron, that in their different ways seem to have? The Midrash Tanchuma, quoted by Rashi, contains a brilliant commentary on Korach's claim. It says that Korach gathered his co-conspirators and issued Moses a challenge in the form of a halachic question. He dressed them with cloaks made entirely of blue wool. They came and stood before Moses and asked him, does a cloak made entirely of blue wool require fringes, tzitzit, or is it exempt? He replied, it does require fringes. They began laughing at him, saying, it is impossible that a cloak of another material, one string of blue wool exempts it, and this alone, which is made entirely of blue wool, should not exempt itself. What makes this commentary brilliant is that it does two things. First, it established a connection between the episode of Korach and the immediately preceding passages, the law of tzitzit. That is a superficial point. The deep one is that the Midrash definitely shows how Korach challenged the basis of Moses and Aaron's leadership. The Israelites were all holy, and God was among them. They were like a robe, every thread of which was royal blue. And just as the blue robe does not need an additional fringe to make it bluer still, so a holy people does not need the extra holy people like Moses and Aaron to make it holier still. The idea of leadership hierarchy in a kingdom of priests and a holy nation is a contradiction in terms. Everyone is like a priest. Everyone is holy. Everyone is equal in dignity before God. Hierarchy has no place in such a nation. So you were surely right to say all the congregation is holy. They were equally right to say God is with them. What was wrong was their last remark. Why then do you set yourselves above the congregation? This was not a small mistake. It was a fundamental one. Korach confused equality of worth with elimination of structure. Korach's mistake was in seeing leadership in terms of status. He assumed that the leader is the controller, the dictator, the ruler, the commander, the superior. This is what leaders are in a hierarchical society. But that is not what leadership is in the Torah. And we had many hints of this before. Of Moses, it says he was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth. Of Aaron and the priests, in their capacity as those who bless the people, it says, so they will put my name on the Israelites, and I will bless them. Neither the priest or the prophet had personal power or authority. They were transmitter of the word, not their own. That is why humility was not an accident of their personalities, but of the essence of their roles. Even the king, the office that comes closest to status, is commanded not to consider himself better than his fellow Israelites. In Judaism, leadership is not a function of status, but a function. It is not about hierarchy, but coordination. The absence of hierarchy does not mean the absence of leadership. An orchestra still needs a conductor. A play still needs a director. A team still needs a captain. A leader need not be a better instrumentalist or player than those he leads. His role is different. He must coordinate, give structure, and shape to the enterprise, and ensure that everyone is moving in the right direction. Without leadership, even the most gifted collection of individuals produces not harmony, but noise. As the book of Judges records in sorrow, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And this brings us back to the blue cloak. A people whom every one of them is holy still needs a leader. Just as a garment, every thread of which is blue, still needs a fringe. The function of tzitzit is not to diminish the significance of the garment, but to endow it with a special and recognizable character. Without the tzitzit, we will never be aware of its holiness. It will be potential, not actual. So too with leadership. It does not diminish the holiness of the people. It makes the holiness visible and directed. In a social order in which everyone has equal dignity in the eyes of heaven, a leader does not stand above the people. They serve the people, and they serve God. Moses' highest honor is to be called the servant of God. In Judaism, a leader is a servant, and to lead is to serve. The less there is of self in one who serves God, the more there is of God. Moses was supremely example of Rabbi Yonatan's principle. Where you find humility, there you find greatness. The challenge of Jewish life is not merely to recognize holiness within ourselves, but to help reveal it in others. When leadership becomes service and greatness becomes humility, communities can flourish, and each of us can contribute to healing the fractured world. I bring closer the world that is to the world that ought to be. Shabbat Shalom.